so happy to be here this evening. Of course, we want to start the event with a land acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded, ancestral, stolen, and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we are actually within walking distance of it's a Squamish word, so I'm going to try and pronounce it as best as I can. It's Kemkemali, which is the place of many maple trees, and it was a harvesting village. I can't speak to the history with any kind of authority, so I will leave you folks to do your own research or ask your own questions if you're not familiar with this space. I really encourage you to. I also want to acknowledge that we are in the downtown east side, where a lot of our neighbors are facing the effects of colonialism and capitalism in really visceral ways. And I want us to be mindful of that in this neighborhood. Whenever I do a land acknowledgement, I'm really trying my best not to have it be a footnote at the end of my welcome. So I'm going to tell you what that means to me, and I hope within that we can have some reflection on what that means to us. I recognize that some folks here tonight just live land back by existing, and some folks need to, like settlers like myself, need to do more work to make that future a possibility. So for me, that looks like trying to earn the word accomplice, and I am still learning how to do that. But my mom always says if you mean something, say it with cash. And so I'm trying to do reparative work and also give the money that I do have in excess back to the nations here. If you folks are looking to do the same, there are several different trusts and foundations that are set up not only by First Nations bands, but by community members. Also, there's certain pay your rent resources that I'm happy to provide later. It would be a very long list right now. I also encourage you folks to maybe donate your time or money to our neighbors or to other organizations such as the Urban Native Youth Association. Cool, so moving through that, with that knowledge, I'd like to welcome you folks to Massy Arts. Has anyone here been before? Okay, most of us. Cool, well, welcome back. For those of you who aren't familiar with the space, we are an Indigenous-owned and led space that aims to platform and make space for over-excluded artists and creatives and community members. And the term over-excluded to us just means folks that are left out of dominant narratives and ultimately our community. And yeah. So with that, just please, wherever you are in your positionality, be mindful of that in this space. And then also, I am losing my train of thought. I'm sorry, the heat is affecting me. So I'm gonna look at my little notes, what I would like to say. Yeah. I think that's all for my welcome. So with that, I would really like to welcome you folks to Not That Kind of Place. I'm so excited to be introducing our authors tonight. Our first reader is Curtis LeBlanc. He is the author of two poetry collections, Little Wild and Birding in the Glass Age of Isolation, Nightwood Editions. His debut novel, Sunsetter, was published in spring of 2023 with ECW Press, and he's the co-founder of Broadly's Ghost Press. Please welcome Curtis.
Can everyone hear me fine? Great. Thank you so much to Massy and to Devin for having us tonight. Thank you to Michael for inviting me to be a part of this evening. It's really great to have you in town, and I'm really excited to be able to share in this celebration of all three of our books tonight. So, my debut novel is Sunsetter. It's just been recently published in April by ECW Press, and they've got copies over there if you enjoy what you hear tonight. So please feel free to pick one up, and I can talk to you about it later if you like. And another heads up that the excerpt that I'm going to read, sort of from the beginning of the book, deals with subject matter related to the opioid crisis. So if anyone feels like they need to take some space, please really feel free to do so. I'm going to read from a paragraph, the very first paragraph of the book, and then jump ahead about 15 or so pages to another moment. This month of May, the hottest in memory. The oil gone and the work gone with it. Gone too, the color of the paint on the abandoned workyard buildings and refineries, and the green of the earth around the open gravel pit on the south side of town. The rusted trucks and their trailers, Carlsbad Company in peeling red block letters, parked again on the outskirts of Perham. This weekend, a pulse reverberating from the Sunsetter Rodeo grounds outward, and Dallin and Brooks now at the center. Now feels right. Dallin takes the small plastic bag out of his pocket and passes it to Brooks, who pries it open and dumps the 2 tablets into the palm of his hand. Brooks presents them to Dallin, and he takes one between his finger and his thumb. "Roll on," Brooks says. They toss the pills back and wash them down with the last of their beer. The immediate rush of the adrenaline makes Dallin feel like the drugs are already setting in, but in his mind he knows that's impossible. The pill is only now working its way down his esophagus, leaving a chalky white trail along the inside, soon landing in the wet mess of his stomach, where it will dissolve and combine with the froth of the beer. His hands tremble and his legs feel stiff and weak, like stalks of dry straw liable to snap at any moment. They buy another round of beer and wait for the pill to kick in. Brooks does a subdued dance, the heels of his shoes shifting in the loose dirt, and wags his finger in front of himself along with the strumming of a nearby guitar. Dallin can feel his heart beating in his throat. He tries to chase it away with the beer, but it keeps pulsing just behind his tonsils. He clenches the arches of his feet so hard they seize and cramp, and he forces them flat again to fight off the pain. Once they've finished off their third cans, they leave the campfire area and follow the dark path back to the edge of the forest. The glow of the midway lights up the edge of the night, a washed-out blue in the distance. As they walk behind the rodeo bleachers, Dallin begins to feel a buzzing all over like the thrum of 1,000 tiny insect wings, one that makes him feel both relaxed and on edge at the same time. He wants to climb the scaffolding to the top of the grandstand and watch the lights of the amusement rides, red and blue, yellow and white, cut the night sky to ribbons. He breaks into a short jog ahead of Brooks and spins around to urge him to keep up, to get on his level. But Brooks isn't on his feet. He is on his hands and knees in the grass. 2 young women approach, and as they pass Brooks, they look him over, then whisper to each other and laugh the quiet laughter that only ever comes at the expense of someone else. Then Brooks collapses onto his side. Dallin rushes over and grabs his shoulders, rolling him onto his back. The way Brooks feels against his hands, it's like he's producing his own magnetic field. "Brooks," he says, "Buddy, what's up? You dizzy? You okay?" Brooks is unresponsive. His eyelids are near shut. They twitch and flitter. Dallin grabs his hand. The tips of his fingers are cold, his palms clammy with sweat. The moisture seems to only intensify the transfer of the charge he feels from Brooks's skin. Dallin takes out his phone and turns on the flashlight to try and get a better look at him. His inner lips are tinged purple. A crowd is starting to form around them. Dallin holds his face close to Brooks's to check for his breath, but it's almost non-existent, barely a whisper. Dallin calls for help. The darkness around him spins and swirls with the lights. He is at the center of 2 colliding galaxies, a constellation coming undone. He screams as loud as he can, uninhibited by the substance gripping his body and flooding his brain. More people gather around them.
A young man and women move Dallin aside and begin checking Brooks over methodically. A pair of flashlights cut through the crowd, and soon two police officers are standing over them. One of them says something into his radio, and the other moves to direct the crowd away. Dallin falls back onto his hands and watches all of it unfold, like a movie with poor lighting and a rushed plot. He has never felt so full of life, and it makes him feel guilty with his eyes locked on Brooks, motionless in front of him. He wants to share with Brooks whatever it is making his body burst and shake to lend him that vigor. He questions whether the source of it might be Brooks himself, as if Dallin has leached the strength from his arms and legs, pinning him to the ground. An ambulance kicks up dust as it comes around the corral on the dirt road, sirens overpowering the distant screams and music of the midway. He pulls up close to a police officer, and two paramedics rush to Brooks's side. Dallin backs away from them, partly to give them space to work, but also to avoid watching what he can hardly believe is unfolding. His mind and body are contradictions. Both horror and joy compete to color the scene. He makes himself part of the crowd that's locked in place, all concerned murmurs and lowered eyes. One paramedic's gloved hand checks for a pulse on the side of Brooks's neck. She holds it there for several seconds, maybe a minute, and then pulls her finger away. The other breaks into a jog back to the ambulance. The remaining paramedic pulls a black pouch from her waist. She removes a syringe, draws the liquid from a small vial, and stabs it into Brooks's thigh. Dallin winces and touches his hand to his own upper leg. Immediately, the paramedic brings her hands together over Brooks's chest and pounds down with all her weight, pressing on his ribcage in a series of thrusts, more than Dallin can count, until she leans down and hovers her face over Brooks's mouth. She holds his forehead with one hand below his hairline and places the other beneath his chin. She tilts back his head and pinches his nose, then appears to kiss him gently on the lips. She does this 2 more times, and Dallin wonders if Brooks might be enjoying it, her loveliness held above him, fully fixated on his. A tinge of jealousy even blooms in Dallin. But when the paramedic places her hand firmly on his chest and resumes the brutal plunging motion, fear replaces all other sentiment. It drives through him like a stake into the cold earth. He is locked on Brooks, on his horrible frozen face and his half-open eyes and the hollowness of his stock-still body. The other paramedic breaks into the circle of onlookers with a small white case, a picture of a red heart pierced by a bolt of lightning on its lid. He opens the case and removes 2 pads. The first paramedic rips the plaid shirt off of Brooks's body, the buttons popping loose from their threading, and together they position the pads on Brooks's chest and abdomen. His shoulders lift, his body shudders. While the first paramedic feels again for a pulse, the second bends down close to the screen inside the apparatus. They wait. Then he looks at his partner and shakes his head. Now, as they huddle over Brooks, their movements are slower, less urgent. One stands up and walks in Dallin's direction, stopping at the officer with his back to the crowd, arms outstretched, holding them back. Dallin sees her tell something, but he can't make out what. There is now only a dull static on Dallin's skin, a white noise all around him. He stumbles backwards past the crowd and into the dark. Then he remembers the black and yellow tent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also remembered what I forgot, which is the access notes. My apologies. So for the bathroom there, we have a single stall. There is no button, but there is a guardrail. If you need any extra assistance, please ask me or my colleague Dax. Also, I would like to let you folks know that there is naloxone on site, and we are prepared to administer if someone is in need. So even if you're walking or around tonight and you witness someone in need of that, feel free to come park. Our next author is Scott Alexander Howard. He lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Toronto. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, where his work focused on the relationship between memory, emotion, and literature. The Other Valley is his first novel, and it will be out in February of 2024. Please welcome Scott.
I have a notoriously quiet voice, so I'm going to gum this thing a little bit. I'm just going to read the first few pages of the first chapter of my first book for the first time. Quite literally, I've never read this before, I don't know what's in it. So this is not out till February, as she said. It's available for pre-order if you're interested, and there's my publisher gave me some free bookmarks, so those are also there if you want a bookmark. I wanted to thank Massy, especially Nevin and Dax, for running the show tonight, and to Michael and Curtis for letting me piggyback on their tour, and of course all of you for coming out on this hot and smoky day. I used to stand alone by the cloakroom door. In the morning before school, and again when the lunch bell rang and the others ran out to the field, I walked to the same spot and rested my head on the sharp crags of stucco. An outcrop of shadow protected the wall from the autumn heat. With folded hands I stood in the shade, gazing at the backwoods and waiting out the day. I took up my station at the rear of the school after Claire's parents moved downtown, leaving me friendless in the neighborhood. I sometimes ran into her at the store or on the boulevard, but as our mothers chatted, our scant talk revealed that our common ground had been only literal, the adjoining area between our yards. The new neighbors were old and seemed to wear housecoats all day. And so at school, I became the girl by the door, Odile who stands by herself. Never spoken to and seldom spoken of, staring at nothing with eyes like carved wood, as motionless as an effigy. Before the bell called everyone in, I liked to slip inside the classroom a minute early. 6 empty rows faced an immaculate blackboard. The dusty odor of chalk blended with a pungent oil. My teacher, Monsieur Pichegru, habitually rubbed his desk with a wet black rag. When I was younger, the oily smell had made my nostrils curl. Then the bell would ring, the cloakroom door would open behind me, and the room would rush with noise. In the storm of laughter and gossip, I remained alone. But when Pichegru strode in with his books and his switch, everybody hushed. We stood in our uniforms until he motioned us to sit, and for the next hours of lectures and tests, I was glad to have company in my silence. That fall I was 16, and the course of my life was ready to be determined. My class had reached the apprenticeship level, and most people were excited about the impending transition out of school. At the end of September, we were to hand in our applications and wait to see who chose us. Later on, once the decisions were made, we would split our time between Pichegru's lessons and training for our vocations around town. Some people knew the work they wanted, and others were scrambling to figure it out. All month, there were visits scheduled from clerks and artisans explaining their trades, as well as field trips to the farms, the orchards, the mill, and the border. That at least was the regular way of things. My mother, however, thought that I was destined for the Conseil. She had always believed this, or wanted to. The Conseil's process was different from other apprenticeships. I could not simply apply at the end of the month and hope to be picked. Before that, they had a special vetting program, and gaining admittance to that program was difficult in itself. Pichegru would have to nominate me, and he could send just 2 students, unlike the downtown school which got to send more. If you managed to get accepted into vetting, you had to get through September without being cut. Those who succeeded were offered apprenticeships in the Hôtel de Ville. Only a few candidates made it each year, and some years no one did. My mother worked in the Hôtel de Ville, but in the basement archives. I see the apprentices they get, she told me. They're smart, but you're smarter. She had tried out for the Conseil when she was my age and made it to the end of the 2nd week. When I said I might be too shy for a career in politics, she scoffed. She didn't know how I acted at school. The idea of me on the Conseil was ludicrous. I had no desire to be a conseiller and no illusions about the likelihood of my becoming one. The prospect of competing against others mortified me, let alone the prospect of prevailing and having such a public job. But my mother's job seemed not so bad despite her frequent gripes. Filing petitions in a tucked-away room, collating reports of blacked-out names and ages. Underneath the Hotel de Ville was somewhere I could see myself. And the fact that all such positions went to students cut from the Conseil's vetting program had helped prepare me for the shame of asking Pichegru on the first day of school whether he would consider nominating me. My mother had dropped me off that morning and confidently wished me luck. School began on the final Friday of August, an encroachment on the summer that never ceased to feel cruel. For the younger children, it was a half day. Pichegru treated it like any other, directing us to open our fresh textbooks without welcoming us back. I saw that some girls in the room had new haircuts, and there were discernible shifts in the social landscape, people who traded desks to get closer to each other, alliances and flirtations that I imagined developing during long afternoons at the beach. I took care to look engaged in the lessons, and when class let out, I ventured up to the lectern. Pichegru was erasing the blackboard. He was barely taller than me, but he was muscular and rapid, destroying block letters in vigorous swirls. The overhead light gleamed off his bald skull. I stammered that I was interested in a Conseil apprenticeship. He finished cleaning the whole board before responding. Through the window, I heard muffled shouts on the playground. Pichegru tossed his cloth on the chalk ledge and turned to me. "I'm surprised to hear that, Odile. You know the vetting program requires you to speak." A blush climbed my face, but the next thing he said was matter of fact. "Write me something over the weekend and give it to me Monday. I nominate next week." He told me that his recommendations were based on a personal essay, the shorter the better, but well considered. The downtown school nominated according to nepotism, but his essay method was based solely on merit. If I could write a paper that demonstrated a suitable intellect, and more importantly, a suitable temperament for the Conseil, he would be willing to give them my name. I asked what I was supposed to write about. Pichegru said that he gave the same question every year. If you had permission to travel outside the valley, which direction would you go? I walked home from school on the neighborhood's one real road, notched into the mountain's edge. On the uphill side of the Chemin de Pont, houses peered from the tops of steep driveways. Across the road, the slope continued downward, clumped with balsam root and weeds. You could see the whole valley, beyond the faded gray roofs of the lower homes, the calm lake, the arid mountains rising from the opposite shore. Our house was a small one below the Chemin de Pont. I walked down the laneway and let myself in. My mother was still at work. She'd been reorganizing the books in the living room, and precarious towers had sprouted around the floor. I sat cross-legged and picked up a vellum-bound collection. It was the only art book that she owned. It contained woodcuts done in red ink, compact square landscapes that made the valley look like a fairy tale. Each illustration was protected by a glassine page that had to be turned delicately. I opened to a picture of a hillside apple orchard, a rolling murmuration of trees. On the next page was the downtown park. It was a perspective from out on the lake, maybe from the summer swim dock. Little bathers stood on the beach. The crimson water in the foreground swayed with lines as thin as hair. The most interesting picture was at the end of the book. It assumed a vantage point in the sky, looking at the valley from above. Our small town in the middle was nestled against the lake, which stretched like a finger up and down the page. The mountains surrounding us were tall and empty. To the left of the mountains was an identical small town, on the shore of an identical lake. To the right, it was the same. The mountains, the lake, the town again. After each valley came another. The towns repeated in both directions, east and west. Dark lakes slid up the page in parallel. My fingers paced the mountains as I considered Pichegru's fantasy exercise. In addition to the valley's natural borders, each town was encircled by a fence. Something not shown on this particular woodcut, but something everyone knew. The fence followed the ridge above my school, high in the backwoods and mostly out of view. Where it came down out of the mountains, it tracked across the wide yellow swath of plains land on the eastern outskirts of town. It curved toward the lake shore and then continued across the water, reaching the other side to claim the narrow slice of land inhabited by the Western Guards. I had never seen the border up close. I sat on the floor, and imagined how it would feel to cross it.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. For our final reader, Michael Melgaard. He is the author of the short story collection Paul Bearing and the novel Not That Kind of Place. His writing has appeared in Best Canadian Stories, Lit Hub, and Joyland. He's a former book critic for the National Post and lives in Toronto, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Welcome, Michael.
Hi. I always mean to delete the post from my bio because it makes me seem like a right-wing lunatic. Like this is the art section. So thanks to Nevin and Dax for organizing things tonight, and Jackie, who's not here, and to Scott and Curtis for opening up. So I'm going to read a couple sections from my book. It's about a small fictional town on Vancouver Island. It's about an hour north of Victoria, which is exactly where my hometown of Duncan is from. But that's just a coincidence. The story's about a guy whose older sister was killed, and he's got to reckon with that many years after it happened. So this section sort of sets all that up, and I will read it. 3 days after Laura went missing, her discman was found on a logging road on the far side of the mountain. Reporters came to Griffiths, which is the fictional town, it's not Duncan, to cover the story of a pretty blonde girl from a good family who got straight A's, who volunteered at an old folks' home, who candy-striped at the local hospital, who captained her basketball and volleyball teams, and who was most certainly not going to be found alive. David's house became the center of the search, both because it gave easy access to the logging roads and because his parents wanted to be involved. For 10 days, reporters in their satellite trucks parked across the street to film the searchers getting coffee and looking over maps. Each morning before heading out to aim, crew buses and work crummies loaned out by the logging companies. A photo of David's dad carrying the stretcher with Laura's tarp-covered body across the clearing won a number of awards. The murder remained unsolved, and the story stuck around and became part of the shared consciousness of the province. Laura's graduation portrait was as recognizable as the photo of the toddler in Victoria who went missing decades earlier, or the undetailed police sketch of the man who had murdered a mother of 4 in Nanaimo and disappeared without a trace. On the major anniversaries of Laura's death, the media ran stories about it. Long articles appeared nationally along with 5-minute news segments on the CBC. In those years, David's uncle spoke for the family. Anytime a reporter called their house or showed up or sent a letter, it was sent to him, and he'd answer the reporter's questions while saying it was too much for the family to deal with. The reporters had mostly left David alone until right before the 10th anniversary, when David got a message on his then new Facebook. A reporter posted on David's wall that he was hoping to connect, ask him some questions. David ignored it. A DM came a few days later. He set his account to private. 2 different requests to follow came. He deactivated his account. Every few years it happened again. He had learned to keep his social media accounts locked, but sometimes they would get his email, find his private Instagram, his Twitter, DMs, friend requests from people who, once Googled, turned out to be reporters. For the 15th anniversary, Laura's murder was featured on a true crime show called Not That Kind of Place, which is the name of this book. David's mom had agreed to be interviewed for the first time. The uncle had died a few years before. The show made the case that Greg Dykeman, the security guard who lived in the trailer at the gravel pit, was the murderer. This had been a rumor at the time. The show renewed interest in the case. There were more articles and then podcasts, and then a few months ago, with the 20th anniversary coming up, David got an email from a reporter named James Moore. He thought they must have an alert for these things. He deleted it and blocked the address. So from there, the book goes on, reporter shows up, David spends a lot of time dodging the reporter, and in doing so, learns a lot about his town and his sister's murder, and kind of has to reckon with that. There's a section I read in Victoria the other night, because it played well to the Victoria crowd. Is anybody here from Victoria? That's just about everyone. Okay, I'll read it again. I'll read this. There's good Hudson Mack content here. The legendary newsman, not the punk band. So David's been avoiding reporters. He turns on the TV to drown out the ringing phone, and the morning news from Victoria came on. The anchor was saying some residents were getting tired of a dangerous crosswalk. A local man appeared on screen standing with the crosswalk in the background. He said, "People are driving too fast. I'm afraid someone will get hurt, and the police won't do anything about it. So I put up these signs." The camera panned across a series of signs nailed to a telephone pole that said, "Slow down" and "Crosswalk ahead." And then, he said, "The city tells me they have to come down. I'm the only one doing anything about it, and I'm the problem?" A police officer appeared on screen and said no one had been hurt at the crosswalk, but they were aware of complaints. That doesn't mean you can go up and put signs up wherever you want. It's a distraction to drivers. So, that was going to be a running gag in the book where there's these horrible news stories and you cut to Victoria reporting on nothing. That's nothing. I don't know if you ever watched the local news there, but nothing much ever happened. The original, I cut it down an awful lot. There was going to originally be a runner about the great E-Town bread squisher. Do any of you Victoria people? Jody remembers because I think it was her. It was a thing that happened in Esquimalt. There was a guy going into the Save-On Foods and he squished loaves of bread in the bags. And every week for 6 weeks there was a live hit. Gordy Tupper down at the Save-On interviewing the manager, and what happened? And the manager was like, "He squished the bread." We can't sell this. And that went on forever, remains unsolved. It was going to be in the book, but it was too silly, but I like to tell the story, so I use any chance I can to talk about the bread squisher. Who is Jody? Okay, this section's a little later, probably the last one I'll read. Like I said, he's avoiding the reporter. He drives around and discovers some things about his town. So here he's in Fuller's Bay. It's called in the book, it's Cowichan Bay in real life. And he's talking to a waitress who tells him, "You wouldn't believe the kind of things that went on here. People killed and you never heard about it. The drugs bring that kind of thing. There was a house up the east arm of the river from the bay. It was way in the back from the ocean, but shallow, like in an estuary. Really overgrown and swampy. The owner cut a path through it, and you could sneak up in a boat. A few times a week, a float plane would come in from the US. They'd land on that side at night, drop a buoy, then float over to the government dock, like they were just coming in for the night. A boat would come up to the house and pick the boy up. Everyone knew what was going on account of the plane landing in the middle of the night was as loud as anything. Anyways, the guy who owned the place and his wife got killed. 3 guys broke in and tied them up, shotgun to the head. Real messy. Had to be identified by their fingerprints, if you know what I mean. I was a kid then, coming home from school, and saw 2 police helicopters over the bay. I guess a neighbor heard the shots and called the cops. There's only one road out on that side of the bay, so they ran into the cops, driving out, turned around and got chased to the house, then made a run for it. 2 of them got into the boat they used for the pickups, and the other guy decided to make a run for it over the mountain. I saw the 2 guys in the boat come out of the river, and a huge Coast Guard boat came around into the bay. They'd been doing some training out by Salt Spring and got the call. The guys in the boat got forced over to the beach by Shanty Cove and got picked up a little later. The guy who went over the mountain never got caught, and I always heard it was somehow tied up with this place. It's the restaurant they're in. But like I said, it was all before my time. David said, "Jesus." But you don't get much of that here anymore. It's a nice place now. Okay, that's it. Thanks for coming out, everyone.